morning, Michael.
How are you?
I'm great. This is exciting.
It is exciting, but it's also, to me, mildly troubling that it's going to be like 87 degrees outside today. The timing of this conference seems pretty spot on because it's about time we start figuring these kinds of issues out, right?
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So I guess let's start off. I think a good place to start is tell us a little bit about how you got started with Scope 3, what you've kind of put together, what you've assembled, and a little bit what the goals are. I mean, I think everybody in this room kind of knows, but I think it's good for you to explain it and expound on it a bit.
Yeah, so as I think probably everybody knows, I sold AppNexus to AT&T in 2018. And part of that deal that was awesome was a 3-year no ad tech clause. I was banned from all ad tech in every single possible way. It's like a whole paragraph of all the ad tech things I couldn't do. I couldn't say the word ad, actually, for a while. I couldn't click on a consent banner. I mean, it was the worst. And so, in a way, I kind of laughed. So I was like, I need a break. All I did was ad tech for such a long time. And so I had to think of some other totally crazy, complex industry that I could go try to figure out and maybe make better. And so I jumped into physical commodities, which, like metal. Like, actually, how do you ship metal, like copper, from Chile to the US in ways that would make it much more efficient for factories to transform that? And the big idea for this company was green copper products, green aluminum products. It was called GMPs, green metal products. And you can probably guess that this company didn't quite work out, since we're all sitting here talking about ads. As I realized, the problem with the real world is that it takes an incredibly long time to actually change anything. The actual emissions from copper come from smelting and mining, not from the supply chain. It's already done by the time you make the copper. And so the idea is, all these great ideas of how to track copper and optimize copper and supply path optimization for copper, none of them were good ideas. And so a couple years ago, I said, well, I know where supply path optimization could work. I wonder if there's a carbon problem to solve. And that led me to do some back-of-the-envelope math on the actual carbon that comes from the programmatic supply chain, and I couldn't believe it. It was just a shocking number. And I showed it to a few people, and they said I was wrong. But the more I did the math, I kept saying, well, actually, I think this is right. I think that programmatic has a huge environmental impact. And so started talking to marketers and saying, do you think you have a problem? And could we help? Could we actually, as an industry, start shifting money from these high carbon supply paths to low carbon supply paths? Now, something I learned from this was, we've all known about the supply path issues for 7 years. I came up with supply path optimization in 2016 and wrote a blog post about it. And it was shocking to me, after my 3-year penalty box, no ad tech, expired, I came back and started talking to people. Like, I actually unsubscribed from Digiday, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how bad it was. I couldn't even
wasn't
read your
expecting
article.
That kind of hurts.
I know. Stupid AT&T. I blame them. But it's funny when you turn back on your Twitter. Remember Twitter? But I turned back on my Twitter feed, and everyone's like, my biggest priority for 2022 is SPO. And I'm like, is this archived? Did I miss something? How did you all not solve this while I was gone? And so that basically became Scope 3, this idea that what people couldn't do for money, and they couldn't do for transparency, and they couldn't do for privacy, they might do for the planet. And the realization is this, that it's always somebody else's money, always. But it's our planet. And if you think about the number of people in this room who are going to go back from this summit and work in the programmatic industry, every single one of us is complicit if we don't go make changes to solve this problem. Not because it's good for business, although it is, but because it's good for the planet, that we have to do something, if that makes sense.
So, in hindsight, is that a little bit, it sounds like a little bit that's what motivates you, because having created header bidding, supply path optimization, at the time not knowing its carbon impact, like, does that motivate you now, push you forward now, because maybe you had a hand in the creation of the problem unwittingly?
It's a good question. I mean, I definitely take personal responsibility for choices that I made early in the programmatic evolution. So inventing header bidding and saying we're going to try to wrap every DFP tag in the world so that Google doesn't have a monopoly on ad serving. I mean, that was the only competitive option to us at the time. Like, that was a strategic choice. And, did I think that was going to dramatically change the internet and cause, massive layers of auctions of auctions of auctions of auctions? I mean, sure, absolutely, that was my plan. But didn't really think it would work, that we could actually get DFP off the page. I mean, if I had told you in 2006, I'm going to create a technology that will literally rip Google off every single page of the internet and wrap them with my own JavaScript, you'd have called me crazy. If I told you that every publisher in the world would use programmatic, you would have called me crazy. Nobody can understand how crazy the whole programmatic idea was in 2006. But now, it's ubiquitous. So I think for me, that's the thing that I keep in mind every day, is sometimes our wildest dreams come true. Sometimes things that we invent actually happen. What if we did have the power to fundamentally change the internet? Well, what would that look like? Would we like that internet? Do we like the way the programmatic world works? So yeah, I feel personally accountable for consent banners and for intermediation and supply path problems and all these things, because in the very beginning, that was the design that we came up with, and I think we can fix it.
At the same time, everybody in this room probably who works in programmatic is also part of the problem. So Scope 3 has been in existence for a year. I'd love to get your take on the degree of cooperation you are getting from, and we'll kind of tick through the marketers, agencies, media companies and publishers, and even ad tech firms. Let's start with marketers. They're the ones holding the money. What kind of cooperation are you seeing from them in terms of getting on board?
Well, I think marketers have both a financial problem and an environmental problem. So if you think about the biggest companies in the world, almost every single one has made a commitment to cut their emissions by half or more by 2030, sometimes longer if they have more physical stuff to do. And so I think if you're the CMO of a big company, one, your job is to get credit for these efforts you're making in sustainability without greenwashing. Two, try to help the company along that process as it takes a while. Most of them didn't think, three, cut my emissions from media and advertising by lots. Like no one was thinking that a couple years ago.
Right.
Now they are. And they're seeing this as a big strategic opportunity to save money. Because a lot of this is about waste. A lot of this is ads that being bought through the wrong supply paths. That means more intermediation. That means more money coming out of the process.
Right.
If I can go to a CMO or a head of media at a big company and say, listen, you're buying through 8 hops. That means 8 people are taking a piece of your money. What if we bought direct? What would the impact on your buy be? And think about it from a publisher perspective, that's more money for you as well. And so if you think about the role of the ad tech industry, our job is to add value to every transaction. Like every one of us would say, we aspire to make transactions more valuable by adding data, by adding logic, by adding custom algorithms, by removing fraud, by removing non-viewable inventory. Everyone has a game that they're playing, but I don't think that game necessarily is as efficient as it could be today. So that's the marketer story. We've worked with probably 30 or 40 major marketers in the past 9 months to do brand studies to help them get a baseline of their emissions. And we've started working with a bunch of brands in partnership with the World Federation of Advertisers to actually do a series of pilots to demonstrate that we can reduce the emissions from their campaigns without impacting performance. And we're going to announce those results in 2 weeks in Istanbul. I'm on stage with Raja, the CMO of MasterCard, and we're talking about the results from MasterCard's pilot and 5 or 6 other of the Planet Pledge marketers. And I can tell you, I saw the first results yesterday, and I basically fell over. the results are incredible. So stay tuned for that. But what's happening with the marketer community is they're seeing this alignment and they're jumping in. And that's driving agency adoption. So what we're seeing from all of the major holding companies, as well as many independent agencies, is that sustainability is good for business. They're using this to win new clients. It's great for employees because people feel excited about the mission. And it's great for actually driving results. In a market that is increasingly complicated, this is a way for agencies to differentiate. Everyone says it's pre-competitive, all of this work. Nothing is pre-competitive. Everything is fundamentally competitive in a capitalistic environment. And the agencies that are doing the best work here and leaning in the hardest, they're winning business. And they're driving better outcomes for their clients. So I think the agency community is all in on this right now.
So I just want to push you a little bit on the whole pre-competitive thing, because there's one thing that I understand from all that I think I understand from all this is that, kind of at least some agreement of standardization of how to measure this stuff is going to need to happen across the industry. And the pre-competitive problem is that holding companies aren't necessarily working with each other on this. How do we get past that? And is standardization going to be a necessity in order to have agreed upon standards?
Yeah, well, one thing to remember is that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is a global standard. There are standards there's standards in the EU today. There's standards at the corporate level. There's the GRI. There's tons of standards here. This is not the Wild West. How we translate those standards into this industry has some nuance. And there's some questions that I think we have to answer. The biggest driver of standardization is marketers that operate globally. Because what they can't afford, if you think about rolling up your global sustainability report as a company, you need that to be one number that you report to your investors in the market. They can't have a different number from Publicis in France and Group M in the US. They can't have a different EU number than US number. And so those marketers have asked the WFA and GARM to come up with a single standard globally that then we can push down into various markets. And so that's happening. GARM, I believe, is going to come up with that standard by the end of the year. They're gathering feedback from a lot of marketers and other companies. Most of the big platforms are participating in that. There's some great work happening in different IAB and other entities around the world. There's some great work out of France that's probably the leading voice on this globally. IAB Tech Lab has a great initiative here. So there's a lot of folks contributing, but it does feel almost like pre-competitive in the sense that marketers don't really care about agency politics. And so the agencies will respond to their clients. They will respond to regulation. And then, of course, they'll try to productize and find ways to differentiate on top of that foundation of methodology.
Does there need to be one kind of watchdog organization that kind of makes sure everyone's adhering to the standards? You've now mentioned, IAB. Is it a government organization? Is it AdNet Zero? Is it the IAB? Is there one watchdog that kind of needs to be the referee of all this?
Well, the actual referee here is going to be the head of sustainability at these major companies. So I talked to the head of sustainability at Activision this week. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars with big tech companies to advertise and distribute their games. And when he calls Google and says, I need numbers that are consistent with the numbers I get from Microsoft and the numbers I get from Unity, he's going to get some kind of consistent numbers. So from my perspective, that's who sets the standards. Now, he uses a big auditing firm, right? He's going to use KPMG or Deloitte or EY or a private firm. Mm-hmm. That's how the finance audit world works. You end up with standards that are implemented by these big four, big five consulting firms. And so that's what we're seeing, is that it's being driven by the biggest companies who take sustainability the most seriously. This is going to be Google and Microsoft with huge environmental science groups that are going to help set these standards. It will then trickle down into all of these organizations, including Scope 3, to make sure that what we're doing aligns with best practices. So I don't know if we need an industry watchdog per se. What we need is deep industry collaboration where all of these organizations focus on their strengths. So everybody needs to figure out how to help in this process and try not to step on each other's toes. And I think we've seen that. I think Tech Lab and AdNet Zero and GARM and the IABs locally, and I think everyone's kind of talking. Forays is involved. Like everyone's kind of trying to figure out where the gaps are and make sure that we're all covering different pieces. But it feels it's chaotic. I mean, it's chaotic, but it's not a problem. It's more like everyone's excited and wants to get this right.
It's chaotic because we're still in kind of early days of this.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's take a quick pause. Any questions from the audience? We've got Brian O'Kelly up here. So if you've got any questions, I think there might be people roaming with microphones. Anyone? Yeah, right in front here.
Hi, Brian Chapp with Tech Recipes. My question is, how do you link all this stuff to media? Like from a measurement perspective, we talk a lot about business outcomes and getting to the overarching sale to do the optimization, but 9 times out of 10, you can barely get there because the data doesn't exist.
Question.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a deep 20-year-old industry problem, right? Like, the metrics don't work. And there's so much data that says that increasing your investment in media as a marketer isn't necessarily driving share gain the way we think. And that's, a lot of reasons. I think it's most pronounced in display, like scrollable web display media, where we just don't know how to get people to pay attention. Unlike linear, where, ad breaks, I think people, stare at the screen and hear the jingle and it kind of it kind of works. So I think that's a basic problem we have. From our perspective, we know what's not working. Like, I think it's pretty easy to say, if we see a property that's obviously a content farm that has very little, if any, organic audience, that's just wasting carbon. And the fact that it has 47 ads on the screen, all 100% viewable, and it has 1,000 different SSPs engaged, probably misrepresenting the inventory as in-stream, like that is a massive carbon problem. And from my perspective, that's the first place, is the stuff we know doesn't work. And that's when we run these pilots with brands, we say, look, what we're turning off is stuff you shouldn't buy. And they say, well, but it's cheap. I'm like, okay, but it literally doesn't work. Like, I got a lot of cheap stuff I can sell you. You want some rotten bananas? I'll sell them to you cheap. I got a bunch of crap you can buy from me for nothing. And that's hard because you have this whole ecosystem of traders and, planners and strategists and media people, and everyone's kind of trying to play the game, but it's not working anymore. And what we've seen is that anybody who can measure sales, and I'm talking about, either using classic MMM techniques or, any kind of advanced CPA measurement, you can see this doesn't convert. And so that's our goal, is start with the stuff that's obviously bad, and then we can go from there.
Low-hanging fruit, rotten bananas. Yeah.
Low-hanging fruit.
Let's talk a little bit about media companies and publishers. To what degree do they need to be part of the solution, and to what degree are you seeing them actively working to minimize their contribution to that carbon footprint?
Yeah, so one of my, starting this company, like I started off by just reading sustainability reports, which is pretty fun.
Is it?
And trust me. And the best sustainability report I saw was from Axel Springer, a big German publisher. Mm-hmm. And it was perfect. Like, they had broken out print and digital. They'd gone down and itemized every single part of their scope 3. I mean, textbook. And my favorite part is it actually put the name of the guy who's in charge of sustainability at Axel Springer in the report. It's like 4 questions, call Marcus. And I'm like, dang, I really want to call Marcus. But I was like too nervous because I was like new to this, and I was like, I don't want to bother this guy. And so late last year, or maybe mid last year, I got a LinkedIn request from Marcus. He's like, I hear you're doing stuff in sustainability. And for me, this was like Taylor Swift, like, texting me, And so I sort of ran around and was really nervous. And we do this call, and he's this incredibly, incredibly nice person, like probably the nicest person I've ever met. And, we start this amazing conversation, not just about how Axel Springer has done this, but how other media companies want to do similar things because it's important for their business. And there's this challenge between print and digital that all publishers are going through. And so over the course of the next months, we started to engage with other parts of Axel Springer outside Germany. And this has led to yesterday announcing that Insider was the first publisher globally to go through the full Scope 3 assessment. And Xiao, you're somewhere here from Insider. Thank you for being the first. It's amazing. But also, thank you for being part of an organization that's so committed to sustainability. And so to me, what's also been inspiring about this is so many other major publishers have leaned in. You probably know that we work with Yahoo. Other very large portal scale companies have reached out and are working with us. Like almost every major publisher group has gotten in touch with us recently and said, we want to be one of the good guys. Now, it's not just for good reasons. It's because they know that the more of that crap we're turning off, the more money they're going to get. And so it's a very self-interested thing. I think also in the SSP world, big shout out to Sharethrough for putting this together. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. But Sharethrough was the first big SSP to say, hey, we want to make our business better. We want to do that around this concept of being green. And what's exciting about that is it's almost like de-escalating an arms race. The SSP business and sort of the publisher header bidding business has almost been like, if you don't run every single bidder, if you don't run multiple auctions, you're going to get spend shifting away from you to people who are more aggressive. And that's an arms race. So the idea of de-escalating, of saying, we're not going to play those games. We're not going to buy from resellers. We're not going to have as many different supply paths as possible. We're not going to slam DSPs with a bunch of redundant traffic. That is incredibly good for the environment, and it also benefits premium publishers. And that is where we see this really nice virtuous cycle. Brands get better outcomes, good actors in the ad tech space get better outcomes, quality publishers get better outcomes, and all of a sudden, everybody wants to go green. It is less than a year since I came up with the idea of green media products. It was in early May at a Scope 3 offsite. Can you believe that less than a year later, we're here with a room full of this many leaders in this industry talking about green media? And that's incredible. I think that gives you a sense of just how compelling this narrative has been.
What will it ultimately take to either identify or even better, weed out the bad actors? We know that ad tech still has plenty of companies that are less than scrupulous. What will it take to kind of reveal them and maybe get them to either change their ways or drive them out of the business?
I think that everybody in this industry is extremely good at optimizing to revenue. And as long as money flows, people will do the behaviors that drives the most revenue. We don't need a major shift in economics for folks to change their behaviors. And so I don't like to think of the bad actors as unscrupulous. I think that they're optimizing to what the economics of the marketplace say. And as someone who designs marketplaces for a living, my simple response is, let's change the economics. If every one of us goes out and decides to make a small shift of our business away from some of these high carbon activities, we will immediately change the economics for every single player in this space. Look, some companies will say, I don't want to do that business anymore. Is Yahoo getting out of the SSP business a direct response to sustainability? Probably not. But I guarantee you the economics of that business started to change as soon as people started changing their buying behavior. And that's what I ask of all of you, is small changes in behavior will have disproportionate impacts in markets. And this is a market.
Oh, it would be a great place to end, but I have one last question for you. and we have 1 minute left. So what have you come to learn is not important in this? Where have companies been focusing their attentions that seems to be kind of leading them away from addressing core issues?
That's a great question. And it's hard to answer. And what I encourage everyone to do is to drive decisions with data. Because there's a lot of things that sound great. So an example that I heard in France last summer was, hey, we switched all of our creatives from being stereo to being mono audio. And we cut the amount of emissions from the audio part by half, which makes sense. 2 streams to 1 stream, that's a 50% reduction in carbon from audio. But if you do the math, you think about the fact that video is like 1,000 times more carbon intense than audio, on an aggregate basis, this only reduces your carbon by like 0.0025% or something. And my analogy for you is like, it's like me going on an airplane and being like, hey, I didn't bring a bottle of water in my carry-on, so I saved like 100% of the carbon from water in my bag. Like, that does sound like a lot of reduction, but for the actual airplane, it doesn't make a difference. And so this is the challenge, and we're all susceptible to statistics. Like, it's really awesome when you're like seeing a press release about reduction. So I would just ask that we all look at the full picture. Make sure everything you do, never look just at creative, never look just at ad tech, never just look at media, never look just at production. We've got to understand how these pieces fit together so that we can make the right decisions. And we've got to really be careful about vendor claims, even mine, because there is a lot of stuff here that's easy to get wrong. And so I want us to move fast, but I don't want us to move so fast that we take credit for the wrong things. The worst case for me would be that every one of you goes home and says, what I heard Brian say was, I can get a 50% reduction in carbon today. It's not going to work. So that's the most important lesson for me, is this is hard, this requires some work. The good news is there's no industry with people who understand data better than us. We've dealt with more data, more complexity. We've optimized on a broader scale. There's nobody in the world more qualified to use sustainability data to change business decisions than us. So I'll leave you with this idea. What if we all took all the skills we've developed over the past 20 years of programmatic and added one more variable to optimize? And that variable would let us change the carbon impact of this industry by hundreds of thousands of metric tons this year. We can do that. And that's what I aspire to do with all of you, with Sharethrough, with everyone else who's on this journey. So thank you so much for believing in it and being here. Now let's go freaking do it.
That's a good place to end. Thank you, Brian.